Welcome to the Occult Think Tank. I am your host, Greg. In today's show, I have with me Mark Powers. Mark Powers is the former director of Jews for Judaism. I would like to welcome Mark to the show.
Thank you, Greg.
In today's program, we're going to be talking about the prophecies regarding Jesus, supposedly, in Isaiah 53. There are 36 of them. And for the ease of communication with everybody so that everyone is on the same page and we know what we're talking about, I'm going to read the entire chapter. So, Isaiah 53, verse 1 through 12.
Should I hold my comments till the end?
Yes. Let me get all this in so that we can...
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And we hide, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteem him not. Surely he hath borne our grief, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before the shearers is dumb. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of many of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because he hath done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servants be justified, justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sins of many, and made intercession for their transgressors.
Convinced me.
Oh, yeah, just absolutely. Now, there are things in that I can see where Christians looking at their story of Jesus and having that in their mind as far as what is in their story, looking at this and seeing, well, there's so many similarities, it has to be talking about Jesus type of thing, but that is...
I can see that as well. The problem is...
Isn't that wearing...
As far as I know, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Isaiah wrote in Hebrew, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And as such, The words in Hebrew have meaning, and with all due disrespect to King James, which I believe is what you were reading from, yes?
Mm-hmm.
His translation leaves a lot to be desired. And there are a few very, very clear things in there, that in terms of just a couple of seconds, I can take the whole thing and have it thrown out the window. But I'd rather go through it verse by verse.
Mm-hmm.
Suffice it to say, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong. If this verse, this segment of Isaiah applies to Jesus, then either it all applies to Jesus or it doesn't.
Right.
Because I don't believe that you can pick and choose, I'll take verse 6, and I'll take verse 8, verse 9 I'll leave, verse 10, not so comfortable with that, and I'll take verse 11. Those are the ones that I feel comfortable with. Those apply to Jesus, the rest doesn't. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
Because this is an entire concept, an entire narrative, if you will, being said by somebody.
One of the things that when I read through it that kind of caught my eye, or in a sense, and so forth, is where it said about in verse 10 that he shall prolong his days.
Yes.
And the pleasure of the Lord. I mean,
Jesus is still alive, sitting at the right hand of God, no?
That's what they claim, but that doesn't line up with the fact that he died. They want to try and act like, he rose from the dead.
You non-believers, it's just unreal that you don't see it. The fact that he died, but he was resurrected and he's alive today, so he prolonged his days. What's the matter with you?
I mean, that is absurd. Because there's nothing in there that says he's going to die and then rise again to prolong his days.
Please stop muddling the situation with facts.
But, in a way, I know we're getting ahead of the going through each verse.
Are, and I really want to go back, and I really want to give somewhat of an introduction to this, because there's so many canards out there relative to Isaiah 53 that really need to be dealt with initially.
Now, before you...
Number one.
Well,
go ahead.
But before you do that, I want to show for everybody, and this will be on the screen before you, here's the list of all 36 of the things that are supposedly fulfilled in this 53rd chapter. Starting with his people will not believe him at verse 1, and then going through, he will grow up in a poor family, the appearance of an ordinary man, despised, rejected, great sorrow and grief, and so on.
Are we talking about Jesus or Barack Obama?
Supposedly this is about Jesus.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
But it goes on and does around verse 10 is where you will also see the resurrected and live forever crap, that offering for sin. All of these so-called prophecies that are supposedly in what I read, that there is corresponding supposed fulfillments in the New Testament. But I show this to everybody so that you can see, and you can pause the video and cross-reference and check all of this if you want to check both.
Please do.
But I will turn this over to Mark so that he can give the backstory and explain what this is talking about. Go ahead, Mark.
No problem. Number one, you have to recognize that in a lot of the Christian circles, and I have examples of this, The claim is that this is such a clear picture of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus that the Jews have avoided this chapter in Isaiah as much as possible. And they claim that, for example, this chapter is never read in the synagogue. And because it's never read in the synagogue, it's very, very clear that the rabbis are trying to keep this information from the Jewish people. Because if the Jewish people were only to hear Isaiah 53, then they would instantly understand who it's talking about, and they would instantly believe in Jesus. There are a couple of problems with that. Number one, let me state out front that it is correct that this is not read in the synagogue. We do read from Isaiah 50, 51 to 54, 55, and it appears that chapter 53 is skipped. However, what that clearly shows is a lack of understanding of how the readings in the synagogue came into existence. There was a time in Jewish history when the Jewish people were forbidden to read from the Torah. You may know that Jewish people read from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, 3 times a week, on Mondays, on Thursdays, and on the Sabbath, on Saturday,
But Mark,
which is when the main reading is held.
Mark, one of the things I'm curious about, because I had come across this, is isn't it part of Jewish culture that a person, and I think it's even written in the Torah, that someone is to write a scroll of the Torah for themselves?
Yes.
How can they do that if they were prohibited from reading it?
Well, it's very, very difficult, needless to say.
Yeah.
There were times that we weren't able to accomplish a number of things, and that clearly was one of the things that we weren't able to do.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nevertheless, that's okay. Nevertheless, we do read from the Torah. But Isaiah is not part of the Torah. Isaiah is one of the books of the prophets. So if we were forbidden to read from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, what about the prophets? And that's how the reading from the prophets came into existence in the synagogue cycle. During that period of time when we were forbidden to read from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, for some reason we were permitted to read from the writings of the prophets. They were not considered on the same level, and so we were permitted. And so they went through and they selected sections from the books of the prophets that had a correlation to what we would have read from the Torah if we were permitted to do so.
And when you say they, you mean the rabbis and so forth?
Yeah. The rabbis and the leaders.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. And, for example, when we read about the construction of the portable tabernacle in the wilderness, the corresponding reading from the prophets, which we call the Haftorah, the corresponding reading deals with the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. There's a relationship between the two. Why don't we read Isaiah 53? We don't read Isaiah 53 because it didn't have a correlation to a segment that would have been read from the Torah. And in fact, it is the same reason why we don't read 76% of the rest of the books of the prophets as well, because they had no correlation to what was in the Torah and weren't selected for that reading. So it wasn't a plot on the part of the rabbis to keep the information from the Jewish people. We know Isaiah 53. We've read Isaiah 53. Our books don't skip Isaiah 53, leaving out a whole chapter, or like the elevators that don't have the 13th floor.
Yeah.
We have Isaiah 53. We've read it. We know what it says, and so forth and so on. What's interesting is that if you take Isaiah 53 and even the King James reading and what it says, and you take it to a basically Muslim country, and you read it, you will not get the same reaction that you do here in the United States. The little bells don't jingle, the little lights don't flash. People end up scratching their heads saying, well, who's that talking about? Because their culture is not similar to our culture in many ways. And one of the ways that it's not similar is they don't have this all-encompassing cocoon of Christianity around them. They have a different culture that they're in, and that is with Islam.
Right.
And so we have, particularly here in the United States, we have a recognition because of when Christianity came about. Here we've absorbed it by osmosis.
Not to mention we have the Bible Belt and the religious right that
You don't just have the Bible Belt. You have the season of the year when you walk into a Kmart and they're not singing Hava Nagila. They're playing Christmas carols. So we've absorbed Christianity more or less by osmosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you read something like this, it strikes a chord. It rings a bell with many, many people, and they go, aha, this must be talking about Jesus. The problem is it's not talking about Jesus at all. If it is talking about Jesus, then there are some major problems. But let's take a look at the whole thing in context, because context, again, is very, very important.
Right.
And
it's fitting to use the term in context, because that's one of the things as an atheist I hear from Christians frequently is about atheists take things out of context. Well, if they want to bitch about context, then they can't bitch when Isaiah 53 is put in context.
Right. The other thing that they should know, your listeners should know, is that within the scroll of Isaiah, there are no chapter divisions like 51, 52, 53. And as such, chapter 53 in reality does not begin at 53:1, but begins in chapter 52.
So where in chapter 52 does the subject of Isaiah 53 actually begin?
Okay. The subject of Isaiah 53 begins in chapter 52, verse 13. And this entire section is commonly called the suffering servant. And again, to help put things into context, we can go back into Isaiah and other prophets, if you will, and see who God continuously refers to as his servant. If you go, for example, into Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8, verse 9, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, who I have chosen, descendant of Abraham, my friend, you whom I have taken from the ends of the earth and called from its remotest parts, and said to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not rejected you. Well, who is it referring to?
That would be the Jewish people.
So we go to Isaiah 44. But now listen, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. Thus says the Lord who made you and formed you from the womb, who you will help you. Do not fear, O Jacob, my servant, Yeshurun, who I have chosen. Who is it referring to as the servant?
The Israel. I mean, it clearly says in verse 1 chapter 44 of Isaiah, Israel, whom I have chosen, Jacob, my servant, and Israel.
Let's go to 44:21. Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I have formed you, and you are my servant, O Israel. Who is the servant?
Israel. I mean, it's undeniable.
Isaiah 45. I'm building a case here. Isaiah 45. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, and Israel, my chosen one. Who is the servant?
Israel.
Isaiah 43:10. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant, whom I have chosen. And this verse will become important a little bit further on in this discussion. You are my servant, declares the Lord, and you are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant, whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am He. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. Isaiah 48, go forth out of Babylon, flee from the Kasdim with a voice of singing, declaring, tell this, say it even to the ends of the earth, say, the Lord has redeemed His servant, Jacob. Isaiah 49:3, and said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Isaiah 54:17, Isaiah 65:8, Psalm 136:22, Jeremiah 30:10, Jeremiah 46:27 and 28, Ezekiel 28:25, Leviticus 25:55, 1 Chronicles 16:13. O you seed of Israel, His servant, you children of Jacob, His chosen ones. There are continuous references. I have many more, which clearly says that the servant of God is the Jewish people.
Right. It makes me wonder, and what was going through my mind is how many different ways do Christians need their nose rubbed in the fact that the servant is...
Let's wait just a second. All of these verses that I've listed are very, very clear in saying the servant is Jacob or the Jewish people, Israel. You come to Isaiah 52 and 53, and it says servant. 52:13 begins, see my servant shall prosper, he shall be exalted and lifted up and shall be very high. However, it doesn't say who the servant is. While the other ones clearly name the Jewish people as the servant, here in 52, the beginning of this suffering servant passage, it does not clearly name the Jewish people as the servant. So you can say, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think the preponderance of the evidence clearly indicates that the Jewish people are the servants. However, it's not specifically and explicitly written as such. And so I cannot say definitively that the servant in this passage is Israel.
But I would say using the courtroom type of analogy, the circumstantial evidence that points to...
Well, there's more than circumstantial evidence as I will develop.
Okay.
But the only problem I have is this. All throughout the book of Isaiah, as I mentioned just a few, it points to the nation of Israel as the servant of God. But nowhere in the book of Isaiah, or anywhere else for that matter, does it say Messiah is the servant of God. So to look at Isaiah 62:13, which begins, see my servant shall prosper, the problem you have is that it's a particularly huge leap to all of a sudden throw in here Messiah, and then, of course, coming to the conclusion that, well, gee, it must be talking about Jesus because, after all, Jesus is the Messiah. That's a pretty large leap based upon the information that's here. But there's a lot more as well, which will make it, I think, abundantly clear that whoever it's talking about, and again, I cannot say definitively because it doesn't specifically say that it's talking about the Jewish people, but the one thing that I can say definitively, beyond the shadow of a doubt, based upon the information that we have, the one person in the world that it cannot possibly be talking about is Jesus.
Well, one of the things when I look at the Isaiah 52:14, as many were astonished at his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Christians would try to say that would have to be because of Jesus being whipped and so forth.
Yes, I would assume that that's what they would try and say. The problem really exists in an understanding of who is speaking. Because unless you can determine who is speaking here, who is
right, and who the his is
giving this report,
you have to.
Then it's impossible to understand what's going on.
Right, you have to be able to identify who his is referring to, because
Correct.
Unless his is referring to Jesus,
well, let's leave it as referring to the servant, whoever the servant may be.
okay.
I feel more comfortable at this point leaving it to whoever the servant may be, rather than saying it's this, that, or the other thing.
Well, something I guess Christians could try and raise is, why would God or the prophet Isaiah choose to use a term that is almost specific to one person, of his or son, when what is being conveyed is like the Jewish people or Israel as a nation?
Great question. And if you recall, a couple of minutes ago, I said to you, we have a verse here which is going to become important somewhere down the line. The question of, could you ever refer to the Jewish people in a singularity as his? And so, again, I want to refer you to the verse, again, I believe it was in Isaiah. Isaiah 43:10, where it says, "You are my witnesses." It's a plural, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Declares the Lord. "And my servant."
Okay, and that's a singular, yes.
"Whom I have chosen." So, even within the same verse, it uses the witnesses, the plurality, and again, in the same verse and clearly referring to the same people in the singularity.
Right.
So it's not at all unusual for the Jewish people to be referred to in the singularity. In fact, it's very, 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 very normal.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not, as far as I'm concerned,
what
it's
I'm
not an
seeing,
issue. Of course, that's not the only place that the Jewish people are referred to as a singularity.
One
Take,
thing
for
I'm
example,
seeing,
Exodus. Go ahead.
that I'm seeing something that would have that Christians would try and jump all over with both feet, is in Isaiah 43:11, where it says, even I am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior. They would try jumping all over that with both feet, because Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," type of thing. The "I am." Because "I am" is used, they want to try and act like he is equating himself to being God.
Well, the fact that he may be equating himself to being God doesn't take away the simple fact that he isn't. So he can use the terminology, or the Christian Bible can use the terminology to try and put forth a particular perspective, but the simple fact of the matter is he's not God.
Right, because isn't it by the Torah and Tanakh, and maybe even Talmud? I've not read the Talmud, because for everybody listening, the Talmud is the oral traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere in, not even nowhere in the Torah and Tanakh, but it's also explicitly said in Numbers that about God, I am not a man nor the son of a man.
Right.
So right there, it would seem to indicate that the God, whatever the Jewish God is, it is not something that could take a physical human form.
Correct, and we can deal with that at some point down the road. I don't want to get too far afield from Isaiah 53 because 53 is a very involved section. So let's put that on the back burner. You know, can God be a man, and deal with that down the road.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. I wanted to go through just a couple of verses here.
Okay.
To show that the Jewish people are referred to in the singular time and time again. For example, Exodus 4, verse 22, God speaking to Moses, and he said, "And you shall say unto Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn." Singular. Okay,
yes.
Hosea 11, verse 3. Yeah, I know where you're going with that one. Again, leave that for down the road.
Okay.
Hosea 11, verse 1, when Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son, singular, out of Egypt. And I know where you want to go with that one as well. Hosea 8, verse 3, Israel has rejected the good. The enemy will pursue him. Again, singular. And again, you know, Hosea 14, 5 and 6, Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 13, Psalm 130, Jeremiah 48, verse 27, Jeremiah 50, verse 19, Exodus 19, verse 2, Exodus 1, 10 through 12, Numbers 22, 5, and Numbers 23, 21 are just a few examples of where the Jewish people are referred to in the singular. So It's not unusual, and you can't jump all over it and say, well, you know, it's referring to this servant as a singular and saying, therefore it must be. Because, again, Israel is often referred to in the singular.
Right, and I will have, as people will see, you'll see the different verses for what were mentioned before you, and I'm partially giving this time so that I have time to put in the video, the different verses so that those of you watching this can, if you want to pause it and read the particular verses that Mark is talking about to firmly establish what he is saying, you will be able to do so.
Okay. Cool. So anyhow, Isaiah 53 really is 52:13. See, my servant shall prosper, he shall be exalted and lifted up, and shall be very high. The question is, who is speaking here? I think it's obvious, since it's referring to my servant, that God is the one who is speaking here.
Mm-hmm.
And he's referring to this servant, at this point, whoever the servant may be. Just as there were many who were astonished at you, saying, surely his visage was marred more than any man, and he is formed more than the sons of men. Again, God is continuing here. He says, just as there were many who were astonished at you, the servant, saying, and now he's quoting something that somebody else is saying. Surely his visage was marred more than any man, the servant's visage, and his form more than the sons of men. So shall he startle many nations. So shall he startle many nations. Who is going to startle the nations? Again, I believe it's servants that are going to startle the nations.
Now, one of the things that comes up in my King James Version, and people will see this before them, it says sprinkle, not startle.
Mm-hmm. Well,
is that a mistranslation?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay.
And not only that, but again, if you can look at the context here, because what are the next words? What do the next two lines say? If this word is startle, then somebody is going to be startled. You know, what does startle mean? To be surprised?
Yes.
To find something out of the ordinary?
Right. The
So
king,
the verse continues, kings shall shut their mouths because of him.
right.
You know, what does that expression mean, to shut their mouth? They're gonna be speechless.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna be amazed. They're gonna be startled. For that which had not been told to them, they shall now see. So they're going to come to the realization of something which they hadn't perceived before.
Right, and I want to draw to everybody's attention because you're going to see this verse in front of you, and the word sprinkle, with that, when you look at the lines after it, it makes no sense.
Right.
You're sprinkling many nations, or you sprinkle many nations. So what? Why would that shut someone's mouth? Why would it do any of this? Because when you sprinkle, I think of that like sprinkling something like chocolate chips on ice cream.
Or salt on
Yeah.
corn.
Yeah, it does not. But go ahead. I mean,
So shall he startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which had not been told them, they shall see. They'll be amazed. They'll be speechless because they hadn't perceived something.
mm-hmm.
And it goes on with the same thought. And that which they had not heard, now they will understand.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a change in a couple of things. Number one, all of a sudden something is going to be brought to their attention that they hadn't seen before. And now they're going to have understanding. And now we begin with 53:1. And somebody is speaking here.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, who would have believed what we are hearing? And I say they because it's a we are hearing. Now Christians will say that this is the Jewish people who are speaking. However, my contention is that that is not exactly correct. Because in grammar, in Hebrew and in English and in just about any other language, if somebody starts speaking, making a statement, how do you determine out of the clear blue who is making that statement? By grammar terms, by grammar rules, the way you determine who is making that statement is you look in the previous sentence and see who was talked about. In this particular case, who did we just talk about? We talked about the kings of nations who are going to be amazed, who are going to be startled,
Right.
who are now going to perceive something. And my contention here is that it is the kings of the nations who are now speaking. And they're the ones who are reporting what they were startled by.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, who would have believed what we are hearing?
Right.
And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? What's interesting about that statement is you find the statement, the arm of the Lord, in a number of places throughout the Bible. And in, I would say, just about every case, whenever it refers to the arm of the Lord, it's referring to the physical salvation of the Jewish people. Because how were the Jewish people taken out of the land of Egypt? With a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. It was the arm of the Lord. And in each and every case where the term the arm of the Lord is used in the Bible, it usually refers to the salvation, the saving of the Jewish people from some physical harm.
Now,
So
with what I'm coming up with when I look up with my eSword, there's only two places that come up is Isaiah 53:1 and John 12:38 for the arm of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to point that out because I know what you're saying, but I'm not seeing it from my eSword Bible, and I'm just curious.
Okay. Let me see if I can give you...
Because what that could come to is a different, to use the term, different translation from what you're seeing.
Yes, sure. That's why I'm trying to find it for you for other than those 2 points.
Now, hand of the Lord comes up 38 times. I'm wondering if that is the difference.
It could be.
That
I don't think so, but
because that's where Exodus 9:3, Exodus 16:3, Deuteronomy 2:15.
Isaiah 62, for example. Break forth into joy, singing together, you waste places of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has made bare his holy arm in the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah 62. The Lord swore by his right hand and by the arm of his strength, I will no longer give your grain to your enemies, and foreigners shall no longer drink your wine for which you have toiled. Isaiah 3, who caused his glorious arm to go at the right hand of Moses, who divided the waters before them to make for himself an everlasting name. Exodus 3, so I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all of my miracles, which I shall go down the midst of it. That's hand. Stretch out your right hand in Exodus 15. Deuteronomy 4, or has God tried to take for himself a nation from within a nation by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Deuteronomy 7:19, the great miracles that you saw with your own eyes, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, and outstretched arm with which God brought you out of Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth and so on. So there are many references,
Right.
and all of them referring to the physical salvation of the nation of Israel.
Right. And one of the things to also note, as a bit of a side note, we can touch more on this later, is the salvation was never an aspect of, with sin, that what you do can be washed away before you do it.
Correct. Correct.
But yes, to get back to Isaiah 53.
Okay. So again, to recap, there are people who are speaking here. And to imagine that it is the people of Israel who are speaking is just not borne out by the text.
Mm-hmm.
The text clearly refers to whoever was referred to before, and that is the kings. So this is now the kings who are speaking, and they're amazed at what they have seen in reference to the servants of God. And remember that this is now the impression that the kings have. The impression can be incorrect, but it is their impression.
Right.
And they say, who would have believed what we are hearing? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him as a tender plant. For he grew up, who's the he?
That would still be the Jewish people, wouldn't it?
No, well, it would be the servant. I have not proven that it's referring to the Jewish people. It's clearly referring to the servant, whoever the servant may be.
Okay.
Okay? And before him, who's the him?
Before him, wouldn't that would have? I mean, before him is a tender plant. If the servant is he who's growing up, then before him would have to be whoever his father is, or whoever is in charge of him.
God? How about God?
Okay.
Okay. And like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should delight in him.
Okay.
What is the perception of the kings? Remember, this is the kings who are speaking. What is the perception of the kings relative to this servant?
Well, to use the blunt term, he's ugly.
Yeah. Are they attracted to him?
No.
Are they impressed by him?
No.
What's the appearance of a root out of dry ground?
A root out of dry ground is not very appealing.
It's shriveled.
Yes.
There's nothing to it.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So again, this is their perception. This is how they're seeing this servant. This is how they have seen this servant previously. But now remember, their perception has changed because of something that has now been revealed to them.
Okay.
But they continue. He was despised and rejected by men. Despised and rejected by men. Who is the he?
Wouldn't that still be the servant?
Yes. A man of pains and well acquainted with disease. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not.
Now, being acquainted with grief or disease and so forth, that does not mean being a healer of it.
No.
It would mean somebody that has frequent suffering from disease.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it goes in conjunction with the next verse. Actually, the next two verses.
Okay.
Me. And remember again that it's the king's perception that we're talking about here. And their perception is not necessarily correct.
Right.
Right? It is their perception. So he was despised and rejected by men, a man of pains and well acquainted with disease, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely our diseases he did bear, and our pains he carried. This again is the perception of the king. We considered him smitten of God and afflicted. We considered that all of these things happened to the servant because God did it.
Okay.
But, verse 5, but he was wounded from our transgressions, and he was crushed as a result of our iniquities. Upon him was chastisement that made us whole, and with his stripes we are healed.
Now, there is a difference with what is in the English, not from our transgressions, it's for.
Right.
And that would clearly be probably an intentional mistranslation, correct?
It is an intentional mistranslation without any question, because in the Hebrew, let me see here, Nipesha Ami Negalamo. Nipeshenu Yeduba. From our from our transgressions, yes.
Okay, that, and would it also be from our iniquities, or?
As a result of our iniquities.
Okay.
Because of what we did. Again, this is the kings who are speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll become a little bit clearer when we go on.
Okay.
But again, he was wounded from our transgressions. In other words, the things that we did to him wounded him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was crushed as a result of our iniquities.
And just to be clear, there's no chance that this is talking about the kings being the Romans, is it?
It's not clear. It could be the Romans. It could be... I think more than one king. It's talking about kings over a period of time. I think that there were many, many kings involved in this.
Okay.
Many, many kings who were involved in this. So could the Romans be part of it? Yeah, they definitely could. Okay, but the kings continue.
Okay.
All we like sheep have gone astray. We turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, but did not open his mouth. And as a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and as a sheep that before her shearers is dumb, and did not open his mouth. From dominion and judgment he was taken away. and his history, who is able to relate? For he was cut off out of the land of the living as a result of the transgression of my people. They were afflicted. Major translation difference, yeah?
Yeah, because, wait a minute, out of the, what I have here is, for the transgression of my people was he stricken.
Mm-hmm.
Not
But
they.
that's what it says in Hebrew.
And how was, I mean, you had said they were, not he.
Correct.
That is, I mean, that's not an accidental. That is intentional, changing it to.
Yes. And how do I know that that's correct? I went to a fairly impartial source.
Well,
I went to the Alkali Hebrew-English Dictionary to look up the word lamo, because the statement here is, as a result of the transgression of my people, they were afflicted. Nitesha ami nega lamo. And the word lamo is a plural. Them. Not a singular, he. Them.
okay, and one of the things I want to point out is I've listened to a lot of the lectures that Bart Ehrman has done on, and he's a historian regarding, like, with the New Testament and Jesus and so forth. And he has said how the New Testament is not a historical document because it's been rewritten so many times. And he had compared that the New Testament with the Old, and he had said that the translators with the Old Testament, the Jewish translators, were very thorough, and they made sure as to not make the mistakes that were made with the New Testament, because the New Testament was rewritten so many times that, and changes were made and things were added and so forth, so as to take away from what is actually what we have today.
Right.
But that is simply not the case with the Old Testament. Go ahead.
Right. Again, I went to what I felt was an impartial source to see if, in fact, the word lamo is a singular or a plural. And according to the impartial source, it is a plural to them. But I went further. I figured, maybe there is another source. And so I went to what I considered to be an interesting source, and that was Zondervan Publishers. You may have heard of them. Yes?
No, I haven't.
Really?
Yeah.
And Zondervan is a Christian publishing house. And in 1987, they published the interlinear NIV Hebrew-English Old Testament, in which they have, on one side, the NIV, and on the other side, they have the Hebrew, but with each word translated as the word stands. So when we get to this section, Nitesha Ami Negalamo, they translate Nitesha Ami from transgression of people of me, Nega Lamo, stroke to them. Again, the Lamo is a plural. But what's really interesting is on the right-hand side, where it has the NIV, how do they translate it? Where they have it translated word for word on the left side, and on the right-hand side it says, for the transgression of my people, he was stricken.
Huh.
I don't understand the disingenuousness of something like that, where you can see clearly from a dictionary and even from their own translation of the Hebrew, that it's clearly a plural, and they make it into a singular.
That is weird. But that is showing a definite bias, if I'm not mistaken.
I would say that it's a definite bias, yeah. So they were afflicted. Who's the they?
They would have to be, in a sense, the people, not necessarily, or the kings. Well, if it's coming from the kings, would it be? It would be the people, not necessarily the servant.
No, because the kings are saying,
or that the kings were stricken.
No.
No, who?
Okay, he was wounded from our transgressions. Who was wounded?
That would be the servant.
Okay. And he was crushed as a result of our iniquities. Who's the he?
The servant.
Upon him was the chastisement that made us whole. Who is the him?
The servant would be the him. The us would be
who is the us?
The kings.
The nations, right?
Yes.
And with his stripes we are healed. Who is his?
The servant.
And we?
That would be the nations.
Okay. All we like sheep have gone astray. Who is the we?
Nations.
We turned everyone to his own way. Who's the we?
Nations.
And his own way?
Well, wait a minute.
All we like sheep have gone astray. We turned everyone to his own way. We turned. Who's that?
That would have to be the nations because of the text, the way it's.
We turned everyone to his own way.
We would have to be the nations, and his own way would have to be like the people of the nations.
Right. And the Lord has laid upon him, who's the him?
The servant.
The iniquity of us all.
And
who's the us?
The nations and the people.
Okay. He was oppressed, who's the he?
The servant.
And he was afflicted, who's the he?
The servant.
But did not open his mouth, who's the his?
That would still be the servant.
As a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and as a sheep that before her shearers is dumb, and did not open his mouth. Who's the his mouth?
That's still the servant.
Okay. From dominion and judgment, he was taken away. Who's the he?
Still the servant.
And his history, who is able to relate? Who's the his history?
His history would still be the servant.
Okay. For he was cut out of the land of the living. Who's the he?
That would be the servant.
As a result of the transgressions of my people. Who's the my people?
That would be the nations.
They were afflicted. Who's the they?
That would have to be the nations.
No.
As
a result of the transgression of my people, they were afflicted.
That would have to be the servant, but it's going back to a plural term.
Correct. So we see here that the servant, while it's been referred to throughout as a singular, a he, the servant is really what?
A plural.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not an individual, i.e. Jesus, as it is basically the Jewish people.
Well, I think the Jewish people fit to a certain extent, but I can't say it conclusively. All I can say is that this servant, whoever the servant is not one individual.
Okay.
Okay? And his grave, who's the his?
That would have to be the servant.
Was set with the wicked, and with the wealthy, with his death.
That would have to be the servant.
Death, multiple. Not singular death, multiple deaths.
It still would have to be the servant, wouldn't it, because it's plural?
Does it make any sense?
Well, no.
Does it make any sense that the servant is a plural?
No.
That there were multiple deaths?
Multiple deaths if the servant is a group, like, to use the term, the Jewish people,
mm-hmm.
It would because you can have multiple deaths in a group, but you can't
Right.
have multiple deaths with one individual.
So who doesn't it make sense for?
Jesus.
Ah, okay. But the word there is clearly someone, some group, or some group of people who suffered multiple deaths, not one person at all.
Right. Unless Jesus was dying and coming back and dying and coming back and dying and coming back.
Is this Groundhog Day all over again?
I mean, wow.
And the Lord wished to crush him. He made him ill. If he would offer himself as a guilt offering, he shall see his seed, and he shall prolong his days. And the purpose of the Lord will prosper in his hand. He shall see his seed and prolong his days.
Now, the term guilt offering is not mentioned. It's just an offering.
Okay. Let me take a quick look at the Hebrew here. No. Guilt offering, asham, is clearly mentioned in verse 10.
Okay, that is interesting because that is clearly showing another aspect of intentional omission.
Mm-hmm. But this is where it gets to be fun. You mentioned before about prolonging his days.
Right.
I got one better. Because the word that's used here, he shall see his seed, the word there that's used is the word in Hebrew, zerah. And the word zerah, to the exclusion of everything else, refers to one thing and one thing only.
Children.
Actual, physical offspring.
So unless the Da Vinci Code, that some Christians really don't like, the idea that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and had children,
Right.
unless that would be the case, this definitely wouldn't apply to him because he
Correct.
would have had no seed.
You can Da Vinci Code it all you like. The bottom line is that the information that we have available to us in the Christian Bible clearly indicates that he didn't have any children.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this word, to the exclusion of everything else, refers to actual physical offspring. And by the way, it's not just physical offspring of an individual, but rather actual physical offspring in terms of whatever it may be. It can refer to a plant. It can refer to a tree, a seed, anything like that, an animal's physical offspring, and so forth and so on.
Okay.
I've heard many Christians say, well, I'm the child of Jesus. I'm one of his followers, therefore I'm his child. To which I respond very, very simply, I'm happy to hear that, I guess. The problem you have is that this word does not refer to a follower. This word refers to actual physical offspring. And in fact, we have an example of it in the book of Genesis. If you recall the story, God is telling Abraham that he's going to make him as plentiful as the stars in the sky and as numerous as the sand on the beach.
Right.
And Abraham scratches his head and says, yeah, okay. And he thinks to himself, this is going to be a small problem because I don't have any children. And so he says to God, yes, and Eliezer the Damascene, he will be my ben, my son. The Hebrew word ben can indicate a follower.
Okay.
And God turns to Abraham and he says, no, only that which comes forth from you, your zerah, your seed, that is the one who shall inherit. So we have the concept in Genesis within the same sentence of a follower and an actual physical offspring. And the word that's used there is the word zera for the actual physical offspring. And as I said, every place that it's used, it only refers to the actual physical offspring.
Now, where in Genesis is that, so I can have that as well?
Yeah, in Genesis? Oh, my goodness. Okay. Let's really quick.
Because that's a good point to make, the aspect of the difference between the followers and the actual offspring.
It's in Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Avram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Avram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." And Avram said to the Lord God, "What will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is Eliezer the Damascene?" And Avram said, "Behold, to me you have given no seed, and one born into my house is my heir." And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This shall not be your heir, but he that shall come forth out of your own bowels shall be your heir."
Mm-hmm.
So in this section, you have Avram talking about Eliezer the Damascene as his ben bayit, his
right, his follower.
But God tells him, no, it's only going to be that which your zera, which comes forth from you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that definitely...
Vayomer lo koach, ko zeracha, your seed.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not your spiritual follower, but only your actual physical offspring.
Mm-hmm. Because isn't that another aspect with the aspect of Messiah, that the Messiah had to be born of a Jewish father and a Jewish mother, that this idea of half man, half God type of thing is simply not in the criteria for Messiah?
Correct.
So just in the aspect, even putting aside the second coming crap, just in the what Chris put forward as the birth of Jesus, he didn't qualify as a Messiah because he didn't have a Jewish daddy.
Well, it goes deeper than that. And we need to examine that at some point down the road in terms of the job description or qualifications for Messiah.
Okay.
But it does go beyond the fact that, according to the Christian Bible, his father was God.
Right. So in a sense, that's what I just wanted to put out there, was the idea of even putting aside the second coming type of thing, just from his birth, according to the way Christians put it forward, he doesn't qualify.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, that's why I said, I think previously in something that we did, that my father is more qualified than Jesus because he fulfilled more of the job description of Messiah than Jesus did, and this is one of those areas.
Right. Yeah, that was in our last conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But
so let's finish up with Isaiah 53, and then we're going to backtrack a little bit. "For the labor of his soul he shall see; he shall be satisfied. With his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will cause many to be just, and their iniquities he shall bear. Therefore, I will allot a portion to him with the great, and he shall divide the spoils with the mighty." It's interesting because if this is referring to Jesus, and the concept is that Jesus is God, how is God going to allot him a portion with the great and divide the spoils with the mighty?
that would, I mean, it would be dividing himself a portion.
Doesn't God have everything?
You would think, yes.
So why then do you have to allot him a portion with the great? And why do you divide the spoils with the mighty for him?
I don't know.
But if the servant is not God or the Messiah, does it fit?
It would fit a lot better if it's not, because then you're rewarding a servant. You're not...
Right. A faithful servant.
Right.
A servant who has suffered. Right? Because it finishes up, because he poured out his soul to the death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. Is it possible for the servant who has been abused, maligned?
Well, the aspect of he was numbered, what that made me think of when you mentioned that, and it popped into my head, was Holocaust.
I'm sure I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
World War II.
Right.
Because the Jewish people had numbers tattooed on their arm. I mean, literally, Jesus wasn't numbered.
Right. Well, you're taking it literally as a numbering.
Right.
But essentially, you can say that numbered means he was counted.
Okay.
Okay. So I wouldn't take it that literally.
Okay.
Okay. But let's regroup. Let's go back just a little bit and see. Aside from the things that we pointed out relative to what clearly doesn't fit, what about some of the other stuff? I mean, was Jesus desirable? Was he somebody?
What is put forward as the image of Jesus, which is a downright joke, given the fact that it's more of a European type of look, he's not an ugly man as is depicted.
Well, was he popular? I mean, it says in here that he grew up as a tender plant and root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should delight in him. He was despised and rejected by men. Was Jesus despised and rejected by men?
Not all of them. He had, according to the Christian
had a follower.
Story.
And of course, there was a time, according to the story, that people came to throw things at him and so forth and so on as he was carrying the cross.
Right.
But up to this point in time, if we look at, for example, Mark 3, verse 7, 8, and 9, Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crush him. Sounds like there were a few people that were attracted to it, yeah?
Yeah.
Luke 2, verse 52, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Okay. Luke 4, verse 14, 15, then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. They began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. Is that the same picture that we have of this suffering servant?
Not at all.
Not at all. It also says, again, that this servant was led as a lamb to the slaughter. You just drew an image of the Holocaust and what happened to the Jewish people. Can we say that it applied to Jesus? Let's take a look. A lamb led to the slaughter. Jesus answered in John 18:36, my kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. So he answers back, doesn't he?
Yeah.
When they're coming for him, right? Matthew 26, and going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So here, Jesus, supposedly knowing his destiny, knowing why he's here on earth, what is his job, what does he say? Yeah, lead me to it. Yeah, I'm ready. Or, my Father, if possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to do this.
Right. He's trying to get out of it if he can.
Yep. And finally, Matthew 27:46. And at about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani.
My God,
that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
At a time when he is supposedly fulfilling his destiny here on earth, what does he say? He questions God.
Right. I've heard
Is that the lamb that is silent before its shearers?
No. But I've also heard some try to say about that on the cross Jesus became an atheist. Because of what
I'd like to see the chapter and verse on this one.
But because of what you just quoted, the my God, why hast thou forsaken me, that because he felt that God had forsaken him, he became an atheist. Yeah. That
okay.
I thought I got a chuckle out of that when I heard it, because it was just that's one Christians wouldn't like. On the cross, Jesus became an atheist.
Yeah, that's interesting. What did I tell you? Verse 9 in 53 rather, and his grave was set with the wicked and with the wealthy in his death, although he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. So was Jesus a non-violent individual?
Not at all. Not at all.
No?
No.
Are you serious? I mean, just because of things like Luke 19:27, but as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might be one of the things that might call that into question. Or Matthew 10, verse 34 and 35. Think not that I've come to send peace on the world. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am not come to set a man at variance against his father. I'm come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is...
But the clearest one, I think, is found in 2 John 14:15. And this is the story of Jesus in the temple. And he found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the changers of money sitting. And then he made a whip of small cords, and he drove them all out of the temple on the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overthrew the table. But there was no violence in this man. Aside from the fact that these people were doing legitimate things in the temple in order to carry out the temple business of offering sacrifices and changing the money of people who came from many, many different countries into the coin that was accepted as the offering in the temple, which is what they were doing there. Here, Jesus not just says, hey, guys, this is not proper here, although it was. Instead, he forms a whip and he drives them out. But he's a nonviolent individual. And, of course,
that's something...
we all know,
Christians try to act like they were doing business in the church type of thing, but...
Well, they were doing business in the temple without any question, but what business were they doing? Number one, they were selling... If you came by plane or by whatever from someplace else, and you came to the temple to offer a sacrifice, and you didn't haul your lamb or your ox or whatever with you on the plane or the cart or whatever, you had to get it from somewhere, didn't you?
Right.
And so that's what these people were doing in the temple. In addition to which, they had to provide the half shekel for the offering in the temple. But if you came with a Roman coin or a Syrian drachma, you had to change it for the half shekel. Oh, dog! I'm going to. This clown of a dog takes his bone and throws it around and throws it around until he gets it to a point where he can't reach it, and then he barks for it. He's an amazing child. But anyhow, so these people are changing their foreign money for the half-shekel coin that they had to offer in the temple. They were doing the legitimate business of the temple at the time. But rather than say, hey, guys, what's going on? Why are you doing this? He forms a whip and he drives them out. But he did no violence.
Yeah.
Okay, and he wasn't deceitful as well, right? For example, John 18, Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Right?
Yeah, but that's contradicted with there were times that he said things just to his disciples.
Yeah, like Mark 4, verses 10 through 12. When he was alone, those who were around him, along with the 12, asked him about the parables.
Right.
And he said to them, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. But for those outside, everything comes in parables, in order that they may indeed look, but not perceive, and may indeed listen, but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven. Wait a minute. Jesus said, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temples where all the Jews come together, and I have said nothing in secret. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, how about Luke 8, 53 through 56? And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. This is about the mother who comes to Jesus to resurrect her child. But he took her by the hand and called out, Child, get up. And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. Then he directed them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astounded, but he ordered them to tell no one what had happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many things with Jesus that simply, it contradicts from one to another. And that is also what was mentioned by, like, Bart Ehrman, the aspect of if you don't read the Bible, in a sense, in order, but rather read it sideways type of thing. If you read, like, one story in Matthew and then check that same story in Luke and Mark and John, you'll see that there's different things in each of the different stories, like the aspect of who went to the tomb. Was it one woman? Was it two? Type of thing. And was the stone moved away, or did they have it moved away, or and so forth. And it all depends on what gospel you read.
Yeah. And that's why I find it really puzzling when they call them the Synoptic Gospels, because the implication is that they are in line with each other. But I think it's anything but.
Right, because
we can deal with that at some point in time if you wish.
Yeah, even on the cross, the aspect of did the others on the cross mock him and so forth. It depends on what gospel you read.
Yes, that's correct.
It just, I mean, was he silent on the cross? It depends on what gospel you read.
Correct.
So it really, of
course, the impression that Christians are given is that, and I've heard this before, that if we're talking about people who are standing on four different corners, they have a different perspective on the accident that happens in the middle of the street. I would say that may be true, but here we're not talking about an accident. We're talking about something that, number one, is not the individual perceptions, supposedly, but rather the information that they're given by God.
Well, if you have four different people looking at an accident, and one says it happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and another person says it happened at 6 o'clock, you have to conclude they're not talking about the same accident.
Really? I can't imagine that would be the case.
Because for those that might not be aware, there are some Gospels that say Jesus was killed in the morning. There are others that say he was killed in the afternoon. There's others that have it was before the Passover. It was on. I mean, really, the day even changes.
Yes.
It just, there's so many inconsistencies.
Rather than being synoptic, they are clearly at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm. There's so many inconsistencies. Even the aspect of eyewitnesses, an eyewitness testimony is considered the worst and most unreliable of testimony.
Yeah.
So the idea of eyewitness is the best you got, then you got a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah. Well, there are probably within the story of the crucifixion and the resurrection, there are at least 23 different variants.
Mm-hmm. And that's not...
Which we can get into at some point down the road.
Oh, definitely. But I definitely enjoy this series, and there's a lot more even in the book of Isaiah, but I want to keep this one strictly to chapter 53.
Right.
In the next...
So, if we can, just to sum up, while it's not clear from Isaiah 52 to 53 who the servant is, while it's clearly talking about a servant, while it's not clear specifically because it doesn't say specifically who the servant is, the preponderance of the evidence points to the fact that it might be the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. The one thing that we can definitely say beyond the shadow of a doubt, the one person who does not fit Isaiah 53, that person is Jesus, based upon the information that we have. And I think it's also very, very telling and very, very interesting. If we look back historically at verses that were used to convince people that Jesus was who they claimed him to be, what's interesting is that they don't use Isaiah 53. And in fact, you have one of the church fathers, a guy by the name of Origen. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. But he wrote an essay, at least, called Contra Celsus. Celsus was an individual who was basically opposed to church doctrine. He was somebody who had a variation of looking at things. And Origen has the following to say about Isaiah 52:13 through 53:12, where he refers to, "Behold, my servant shall have understanding and shall be exalted and glorified." And he says, "I remember that once in a discussion with some whom the Jews regard as learned, I used these prophecies. At this the Jews said that these prophecies referred to the whole people as though of a single individual, since they were scattered in the dispersion, and smitten, that as a result of the scattering of the Jews amongst the other nations, many might become proselytes. In this way, he explained the text, thy form shall be inglorious among men, and those to whom he has not proclaimed shall see him."
Huh.
So going all the way back, people claim that this is a new invention, a new Jewish invention, that it's talking about the Jewish people. But going all the way back to the beginning of the church, it was very, very clear that the Jewish concept and the Jewish interpretation of Isaiah 52 through 53 was that it refers to the Jewish people and not to the Messiah in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Because is that even a messianic, Isaiah 53, is that even messianic at all? Or is it...
Well, that's a great question. And I think to a certain extent you could say that it may be construed as something that occurs during the Messianic times, because clearly the role of the Jewish people and the perception of the Jewish people will change in the future. The anti-Semitism won't exist because certain things have occurred, and therefore I think you can say that this may in fact be referring to the Messianic times.
Maybe referring to the times, but it does not seem by any stretch that it is referring to the Messiah.
Unless you say that it's referring to the Messiah as a member, since remember he's going to be Jewish, as a member of the Jewish people.
Okay, I mean, in that regard, since the Messiah is a Jewish concept, isn't it a given that it would be...
Is it given? Oh, yeah.
So the aspect, it wouldn't be a shocker. This is a member of the Jewish people, not a half man, half God type of thing. Which,
correct,
by the way, is a Greek
that wouldn't be what the shocker is here in Isaiah 53. The shocker is how the perception of the Jewish people on the part of the kings or the nations has radically changed.
I definitely enjoy these conversations and so forth, and I look forward to continuing this series and going into other topics as well.
Cool. No problem at all.
You've been listening to the Occult Think Tank with Greg. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Later, people.